Okay, thank you so much for inviting me. It's just an honor for me to be here. My name is Serene Hackel, and I was married to a co-pilot of a B-17 bomber plane who survived 32 missions over Germany during World War II. World War II. And he was the co-pilot, and the pilot's sister wanted to give him a rabbit foot for good luck, but she said maybe I should give him a little 6-month-old puppy, which turned out to be quite a story, but anyway. So they took him against regulations to England, and he became their guardian angel. I met my husband 2 years after. Can you all hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
I can speak louder. I can
No, you're fine.
But what was I saying? I met my husband 2 years after the war, and we had, after 10 dates between February and July, we got engaged. And after the third date that we had, he started to regale me with stories of Skipper. And over the years, to myself and to people in social situations, he must have told the story at least 1,000 times. And you probably wonder why, it happened like that, but I think it happened because when I was 18 years old, I was at the University of Michigan. I was a little dopey and, not dopey, unintelligent, but very inexperienced and naive, and a young man had been in Europe in the battles, and he came over to get some extra education, maybe radar, I don't know what it was, and he asked me out. And on the first date, he asked me, he told me that about this horrible battle that he was in. And I was very sympathetic. And he asked me out again, and then he told me the same story. And silly me said, "Oh, you told me that before." And he burst into tears. And it it affected me so much that I never, ever, in the whole of my many years, have said, "You told me that story before." Because I think that people who tell the story more than once, it means really something to them. So, anyway, I just, no, I forgot what I was going to say, but let me just see what.
Is this what it
That's on your left, so it's where it's supposed to.
So, as I said, during the many years, he told the story so many times, and I moved ahead 50 years, and we retired to Goshen, Connecticut, which was a very rural community, and they had a clubhouse, and they had tennis courts, and all of these beautiful things. And anytime anybody asked me to do something, I said yes. So somebody asked me if I wanted to be in a writing group, and I said yes. And that was a story in itself, which I'm not going to go into. But anyway, I wrote 3 books, and I wrote a family story, I wrote a children's book, and I wrote my first novel. And somebody in the writing group said to me, "Serene, what are you going to write next?" And I said, I haven't the vaguest idea. Well, she had been one of those part of the social group that she heard my husband make the story. So anyway, she says, I have an idea. Why don't you sit down at the kitchen table and have your husband tell the story, and you write it down and you'll have a book. I said, gee, that sounds like a good idea. So I did. Every morning after breakfast, for about an hour and a half, we would spend writing in the book. And when it was all finished, I read it. And my heart sunk. It wasn't good. Without his voice, without the little twinkle in his eye or whatever it was not, it just was like a boring documentary. So I started asking him questions. After all those years of marriage, I never asked him questions. I just let him keep telling the story. I started asking him questions, and all of a sudden I got a revelation. He wasn't entertaining anybody. He was trying to forget the exploding planes and the loss of bunkmates and the massive killings, and trying to tell something ahead that was positive and funny so that he wouldn't remember the horror of what he had been through. And a new intimacy grew between us. And he was glad that I told him that the story wasn't good, because we rewrote it. And that was another experience. And when it was finished, we thought we would send it to a publisher, but it took 6 months for them to even read it. At that time, we were too old to wait 6 months. So we did some experimenting, and we found a publisher in Maine, and in 2003, we published a hardcover book. And 250 books we bought, and it was near Christmas, and we gave 50 books away to family and friends, and then we sold these 200 books, and they all went. And everybody wanted us to reprint it, but it was a little bit too expensive, and we got busy, you know how you get, and all of a sudden it was not so important. So anyway, I don't know why I'm stuck on things, but we rewrote the book, and no, we didn't rewrite the book. We just did it. So I have to look.
Serene, why don't you sit down and be comfortable?
Yeah.
You don't have to stand. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so I know. So I'm going to tell you about the 50 books, 2 stories about the 50 books that we gave away. One, my husband got the idea that he wanted to write Queen Elizabeth. That he wanted, because she was a teenager at the time, and he wanted to write her and send her a book. So we went to the embassy in New York, and he asked them, how do you address the Queen? She says, oh, the woman said, don't send a book. She doesn't really accept anything at all. He said, I know, but well, how would you address the, he said, I guess I won't send it. He said, but maybe if you could just tell me how I address it. He said, well, the woman said, you say, dear madam, and you never say you only say your majesty. So he went home and he thought about it. He says, I'm not going to listen to her. I'm going to write a letter. And he did write a letter, and I have it here. And he not only wrote the letter, but everybody he met, he memorized the letter. He told the exact word for word what the person did. So here it is. It's dear Madam. It's not very light here, but Mrs. Hackel and I wrote in self-published Skipper Goes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Skipper Goes to War. It is written as a novel based on a true story about a small, soft, black and gold Cocker Spaniel puppy and a Flying Fortress bomber crew who cared for him during the during the months leading to the invasion of Normandy on D-Day. We felt moved to send Your Majesty a copy of our book because much of what we have written describes the experiences I shared with the English people along with my memories of East Anglia and London. In many ways, it was both the best of times and the worst of times. I was 21 years old and a lieutenant, and if I remember correctly, Your Majesty was a teenager. I recall somewhere back then listening to Your Majesty addressing the English people and on the radio. It was so sweet and uplifting. I remember commenting to one of my buddies, "Isn't she a fine young lady?" I met Serene after the war in 1946 and were married just 7 days after your wedding to Prince Philip in 1947. We hope Your Majesty, Prince Philip, and your family will enjoy Skipper's story. We love him as much as he loved us. So anyway, one day we both went to the Goshen post office, and it was very, very rural there. And they said, "Look, you got a letter from Buckingham Palace." And here's the Buckingham Palace, and here's the letter. And it says, "Dear Mr. Hackel, the Queen wishes," I think I'm going to stand up because it's lighter. "The Queen wishes me to write and thank you for the letter and a copy of your book about Skipper, the Cocker Spaniel puppy adopted by a Flying Fortress bomb crew during the last years of the Second World War. The Queen well remembers those dark days and has great admiration for those like yourself who served so bravely during that terrible time. Her Majesty thought it was most kind of you and of you to send her a copy of the book you and your wife have written, and thanks you very much."
Very nice.
Very nice.
Great.
And by the way, I mentioned that my husband told everybody 1,000 times about the story, but I do want to say that it's not everybody's way of doing it. Some people are very private about their experiences. Some people don't want to share at all. Some people love their time when they were in the armies, even if you were drafted or you were volunteer. Whatever works for you is really the most important thing, because there's no one right way or wrong way. And all of us, whether you were in administration or battles or whatever, we all wouldn't be here if it weren't for you, so I wanted to thank you for that. And that was what I forgot to say in the right order. That's what So anyway, the years have gone. Oh, so I wanted to read you a little bit of it. If you don't mind, I picked out 3 little things to read, and then I'll tell you how this came about. Okay, I'm going to stand on, not because I just need the light. Yeah, that's
by the door. It's light.
Yeah, it's very light here. He wrote to his sister when he got to East Anglia.
Thank you, Len. I'm sitting over here trying to adjust the camera.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you okay?
Now I gotta work.
Dear Jen, that's his sister. Well, here we are at our bomber base at the UK. Our flight from the USA to England was a nightmare because of problems with Skipper. He nearly got shot. We had to force feed him oxygen in high altitudes, and he almost froze to death in the plane's camera hatch. To top that, they wanted to quarantine him for 6 months. Feeding him is a pain in the neck, and each night we all have to contribute parts of our supper for the daily meal. Too bad there's no place for us to buy regular dog food. Hope all is well with your family. What do you hear from your husband, Reggie? I love to find him here in England. Wish to be loved. His brother-in-law was a really dapper Dan. If he didn't have the right color socks and we had to go someplace, we all had to wait until he went and got the right color socks, believe it or not. And guess what he was doing in World War II? Baking tires. But it was very important. Anyway, so the indoctrination briefing the following morning after you wrote this letter was a really sobering experience. 4 replacement crews totaling 40 men were seated in the ready room, a theater-like setting. The first officer to speak was from the intelligence section. He spoke in a stoic monotone. Current statistics here at the 385th show that only 3 out of 10 bomber groups survived 25 missions. Flying close formation is key to improving your chances. You must fly tight enough to prevent enemy fighters from flying through your formation. This forces them to pass above and below you, which will afford maximum firepower. He went on to relate in detail how everyone was to function with the French underground. If you have to bail out or crash land in France, the French will rush to the scene to beat out the Germans. They will take you to a safe house where you'll be carefully interrogated. Don't be surprised if they include questions about baseball stars and comic strip characters, which only Americans can easily answer. The first thing you must do is bury your parachutes. Be sure to hold on to your escape kits, which will be issued to you after passport photos are taken to you dressed as European-style civilian clothes collected for this purpose. The kit also contains maps and concentrated survival food. This will be your lifeline. It's vital to exercise daily in order to condition yourself for the possible hike over the Pyrenees into Spain. Do exactly as you're told. Your lives will be in French hands. Their safety will be in yours to keep all your discussions secret. If you come down in Germany, lots of luck. So that was his introduction to his time in the Army. 3 out of 10 will survive. And they had this Brooklyn guy be the charge d'affaires, and they asked him to take care of Skipper while they were on their missions, because they wouldn't think of bringing him there. And he had a Brooklyn accent, which I won't try to imitate, but anyway, he after a very big mission that they had, he came over to them and he said this, and I'll read the second part of it. I'm only reading 3 things, but anyway. Hey, you guys, I got 3 days worth of mail here, and a carton for Lieutenant Hackel. Skipper's all yours. I've had it with him. Skipper pulled away, dragging his leash while greeting each of his pals. His entire rump was contorted in a euphoric shimmy of excitement. Jean examined the box, hastily scanning the return address. Oh boy, it's from my sister. This is going to be great. We'll have ourselves a feast on some goodies from home. While Bob and J.O. were all smiles and they gathered around Jean. Tearing at the wrapping, he salivated in anticipation of his sister's Toll House cookies, delicious chocolate brownies, and assorted stateside candy. Jean reached into the open box and pulled out the first item beneath the paper stuffing. Oh, look! She included something for Skipper. He held up a small box labeled dog yummies. How about that, laughed J.O. With both hands, Jean grasped a few more items. Milk bones, dog treats, canned dog meat, and a paper package of kibble. Gene dug his hands among the wads of paper, frantically searching for whatever treats his sister might have included for him. There were none. I'll be damned. This is not to be believed. Gene shook his head with disappointment and embarrassment. She could have at least tucked in a couple of 5-cent Hershey bars for her big kid brother. He felt ridiculous. Opening the box of dog dummies, Gene said with a touch of forced humor, "Here, Skipper, look what Aunt Janice sent you." Gene held out a small caramel-colored square between his fingers. Skipper rushed over for his hand out and snatched the morsel. After one chew, he opened his mouth, stuck out his tongue, and with his tail between his legs, ejected the yummy on the floor between Gene's feet. "You ungrateful little SOB," yelled Gene. "You're going to eat these treats if I have to shove them down your throat." Lifting him up on his hind legs, Gene pried open Skipper's jaw and pushed a fresh yummy into his mouth, squeezing in his snout and holding it shut. Gene waited as Skipper obediently tolerated the unpleasant situation. "Now, doesn't that taste good?" asked Gene, finally releasing his grip. Skipper, his chops curled in a look of disgust, deposited the partially chewed sticky dog candy into Gene's lap. J.O. rocked with laughter. "What do you expect of the poor dog? His meals have been the same as ours since he was 8 weeks old. How would you like to try a dog yummy?" "No, thanks. You made your point, but my sister hasn't heard the end of this yet." And the last thing I'm going to read is the beginning of D-Day. I thought it was very touching, although it's longer than I'm reading. They had just come back from a mission, and 2.5 hours later, the GAT, his name was the Charge of Affairs, and he woke them up. He said, "What's going on?" Anyway, they didn't know, and all of a sudden, as soon as the enlisted men left the rear end of the ready room, the officers filed in and took their seats. "This ought to be good," said Gene. Colonel Elliot Vanderveer, a much respected and revered West Point officer, stood tall on the platform. "Good morning, gentlemen. I've got some exciting news for you." He paused for a few seconds. "This is it. This is D-Day." It was electrifying. The whole group jumped up their feet, welcoming the announcement they thought would never come. Two staff officers dramatically flung back a curtain, revealing a room-sized map of the 5 Normandy invasion beaches. "Let's quiet down, fellas," ordered Colonel Van. "Before we get into the details of the mission, I have some messages I want to read to you. The first is from our Supreme Commanding Officer, General Eisenhower. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, you're about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. The tide has turned. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory." This was followed by equally stirring prayers from President Franklin Roosevelt and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Gene choked up with words that strummed up his own feelings, a struggle to preserve the Republic, the religion, the civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Every nerve in his body was on edge with excitement. And then he goes into what happened on D-Day, which if you want to buy the book, and you can read it, but some of you must know about it already. So that happened, and then you want me to stay where I am.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
I've already moved it over.
My husband passed away, it'll be 5 years this November 20th. He was 92. And when he passed away, and of course I missed him a lot. And I went to the doctor for my yearly physical, and he asked me how I was doing. And I said, I'm doing okay. I'm trying very hard. It's not easy, but I'm trying. And he said, well, how are you spending your time? And I said, well, I belong to a writing club. He jumped up. I didn't know what he was doing. He ran over to his counter and he got a piece of paper and pencil. He's writing. He hands me this piece of paper and he says, my best friend publishes paperbacks. Call her. So I did, and I had just finished another book, and she did such a wonderful job on it, and I had such a good experience with her. And I said to myself, you know, maybe I should do this in reprint this in paperback. So many people asked me to print it again, and so I did, and here it is, the story of a little soft black and gold Cocker Spaniel whose unconditional love and whose and foolishness calmed the spirit, calmed the fears, and lifted the spirits of the Army Air Corps crew in what had to be one of the most traumatic experiences in their lives. And somewhere up there in the universe, my husband must be smiling because I've told it for 1,001 more time. Thank you. If anybody has any questions that I can answer, I'll be happy to do so.
Do you recall the nose on your husband's plane? Was it called the Skipper's Den or Skipper's House, or what was it called?
I didn't know that.
They usually had nose on, and I wonder if that's maybe what they call it.
I don't know what they called it, but I know that the navigator and they all were very concerned about how Skipper was going to survive the trips, whatever they did. And one of the best parts of the book that I like is that first they had the pilots, each plane, the missions, they were going to do 25 missions. Then they changed it to 30 missions. Then they changed it to they had to fight till the end of the war. And the morale was so horrible that they decided to give them 30 days rest and recuperation. So they decided that they would take Skipper back on the boat because they didn't want him to stay over there while they were having a good time at home. So he took him over, and they almost threw him overboard. And what happened? They had to sneak out at night and clean up after him because nobody knew he was there. And to me, that was the best part of the book, and how he survived gave me hope for humanity. Anyway, so that was the best part of the book. But if anybody wants to read it, they can find out how it happened. The general.
We had Serene at Coffee Hour this past summer, and I bought one of the books, and it's a great, easy read. It's a fun read, and
I did
enjoyed
forget
the
to.
story.
I don't know why I'm forgetting to tell you things. When I decided to reprint the book, I read it again, and I said, oh, it's got all these F words in it. And I said to my husband when I was writing, I said, we can't put that in. He said, well, that's how we talked. I said, I don't want to, that's not accurate if I don't put them in. So we did leave them in the hardcover book. And one of the librarians who I knew said, no, we can't put this in here because the young adults have it, and we don't want to do it. So I took all the F words out, and that's what it was. So it was really nice.
Probably a
Everybody-
smaller book then.
Huh?
Probably a smaller
Fewer words.
book. You had a lot fewer words. Took out over 10 down the words.
right there.
It's a novella now.
It was really an adventure doing this, and I really, very few decisions were made just by me and the family. We always made decisions together, because he wouldn't let me get away with backing out. He said, oh no, you're gonna be part of this. He says, because I don't, if it's a mistake, he says, I don't want you to blame me. So this was my first decision, big decision of spending money, and I'm so glad I did it, because I met so many wonderful people, and it just made me feel good, and I hope it made you feel good.
Where did Skipper finish out his life?
He finished it out in South Carolina.
With one of the boys?
Well, not one, it was the sister who gave it to him.
There's a moral there,
I'll-
John.
Finish out my life in South Carolina. There you go. I like that.
At the end, we put a little epilogue in. It said, let's see, these glasses don't work for reading, I don't understand it, but it said, let's see, where is it? This isn't it. Only the, let me see. J.O.'s family was delighted to take custody of Skipper for the duration of the war. It was reported that he refused meals of dog food and continued to entertain everyone with his song and dance routine. Only the officers returned to England, where only the officers returned to England after the month's rest and recuperation. Al, J.O., and Bob flew 5 more missions and returned once again to assignments at Stateside Air Base. Gene accepted a post as C-47 transport pilot with the headquarters wing of the United States Strategic Air Forces. He stayed in Europe throughout the last year of the war, flying resupply missions to the front lines and retrieving wounded soldiers, liberated prisoners of war, concentration camp survivors, and slave laborers of varied nationalities. That's how we spent the last year of the war.
Are there any survivors out of the air crew of 10? Are there any that are living today?
There might be one. There might be one. Although we used to exchange Christmas cards with them, with the few that were left. And I haven't gotten a Christmas card, so I don't know. He might be living with his daughter, or I really don't know. But he would have been, let's see, 5 years, 90. He would have been 97. He could be 97. He could be 97. But he was the navigator. We were very friendly with him. We kept in touch all the years. I had a couple of reunions too.
Oh,
Yeah, it was very nice. Anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
No, I think that's it. We thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I hope we did.
I didn't want to put you to sleep.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.